Well, hey, good afternoon, everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Jim Boozer. I'm the Executive Vice President of NDIA, and I'd like to take just a quick opportunity to welcome you all here to this afternoon's event, Accelerating Commercial Technology into the DoD, Defense Innovation Unit's 2021 Annual Report. And, I just got to tell you, this is, in this environment in which we find ourselves, this is the exact type of strategic dialogue uh, that we need to be having in our country today. And this is extremely important. So today's event is hosted by NDIA's Emerging Technology Institute, ETI. ETI, as I think some of you know, is led by our very own Dr. Mark Lewis, who is the former Acting Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. And ETI provides the leadership outside the government to convene open discussions and forums like this and engage with our national leaders in industry, government, and academia to inform the development and integration of emerging technologies into our DIB, our Defense Industrial Base. With us today, we also have our very own Deputy Director of ETI, Dr. Arun Seraphin, and Arun is going to help facilitate the Q&A after the DIU Director, Mike Brown, sort of gives us an overview of the 2021 Annual Report. I think today's event gives us a chance to expose our NDI members to some of the great successes that the DUI has achieved, and importantly, help members better understand how to work with the DIU team and government. And as we all know, we're in a global technology competition, and the nation is facing an ever increasing and rapidly changing set of threats. And so I think that's why this discussion is so very, very important. And as I alluded to, it's the kind of dialogue we need to be having today. So we want to be able to get the very best technology that we can possibly have into the hands of our warfighters sooner than later. Because I don't know about you, but as a former soldier, I want my soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardmen fighting with a complete unfair advantage over our adversaries. And Mike and his team help us do that. So first, a couple quick admin remarks. All attendees are currently muted. If you have questions, I'd go ahead and, as Mike talks, I'd ask you that you go ahead and submit those to the question bar on your GoToWebinar control panel. And if you're a member of the press, please identify yourself with your name and organization and press question in capital letters. Now it's my honor and privilege to introduce to you the Director of DIU, Michael Brown. Michael, as you all know, the DIU was established in 2015, and the DIU fields leading edge commercial capabilities to the military. And it's embedded, DIU is embedded in key innovation regions across the country. And this helps build relationships and ensure that we're looking at strengthening our national security innovation base. So Michael served 2 years as a White House Presidential Innovation Fellow at DoD. So innovation is in his blood. He was also the co-author of the Pentagon study on China's participation in the U.S. venture ecosystem, which was the catalyst for FIRMA. Mike was previously the CEO of Symantec Corporation, as well as the former chairman and CEO of Quantum. And there's really only one thing that Michael and I have in common. We both got our bachelor's degree in 1980. Of course, he got his from Harvard, and I'm a product of the South Carolina education system. So that's where the similarities start and stop. So Michael, thanks for being here and taking time out of your busy day to be with us. Over to you, my friend.
Well, Jim, thanks for that great introduction. You've just shared with everyone that we're both old now. They could probably tell by taking a look at us. Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about the work that ETI is doing. So before I get started, just a quick shout out. I couldn't have more respect for Dr. Mark Lewis, who I had the chance to work with and for at DoD for a couple of years. And then now he's joined by Arun Seraphin, who I consider a friend and really one of the most thought-provoking, innovative thinkers on the Hill, serving in the SASC professional staff leadership for a while. So just a great team at ETI, and really looking forward to collaborating with ETI. We both are, ETI and DIU, both interested in what we can do to accelerate commercial technology solutions from folks like you who are listening to the warfighter, because Jim said it well. We've got to make sure, I've heard General Mattis say this so many times, we've got to make sure we are fielding our soldiers, sailors, airmen, guardians, Marines with the gear so it's an unfair fight. That's really what Ash Carter had in mind when he formed DIU, as Jim said, almost 7 years ago now. He started looking out and seeing so much happening with folks like you who were developing innovative solutions, and said, we have to find a way to deliver that faster. And in fact, his idea was that DIU should help do that, and do it in a different way than the traditional acquisition process. We'll come back to that at the very end of my talk today, talk about what we'll be doing to further accelerate adopting commercial technology and having that adoption be faster. In fact, when Ash Carter formed DIU, I don't think we were as aware as we are today as a nation of the tech race that we're in with China. So China, while DIU was a great idea in the absence of any global competitors, today with China being the pacing challenge, it really animates what we do. It creates a sense of urgency that we need to make sure we're successful in this mission. So let's go ahead with the next slide. First, a little bit of context setting. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone on the call that really technology dominance is really going to be the key battleground for the US military. We've got to make sure that we continue to have superior technology. What's different is in previous generations, we've had what the military calls an offset, or we've had a technological advantage that maybe our adversaries didn't have. So this goes all the way back to the end of the Second World War, when we had nuclear weapons and no one didn't. We showed that to dramatic effect in the first Gulf War, our technological capability. But what's happened now, as we know, is there's a global diffusion of technology, and so it's a little less likely today that we're going to have something that our adversaries don't. But what we need to do is make sure that we're fielding whatever technological capability we have faster, and we develop the agility to make sure that we're using this in warfighting concepts. So you can see this comment from the last National Defense Strategy from 4 years ago, saying it's not about having something our adversaries don't, but who can integrate this in a new way of fighting. And you see some of the game-changing technologies I listed below, all of which we're trying to integrate into warfighting concepts. What's glaring in this is there's only one that's military only. So DoD has moved from an era where it's developing key technologies. At one point, DoD developed semiconductors, of course. Now we buy maybe 1% to 2% of the world's output in semiconductors. Most of these technologies that we need to adopt to modernize DoD are commercial. So that really implies a completely different motion than the traditional one we've had at DoD. Let's go to the next slide. So this is what's changed as we look back over the last 50 or 60 years. At that time, when you can see some of the technologies where DoD was on the forefront in the 1960s, when the space race was with the Soviets was prominent, US defense-related technology, so DoD plus our prime contractors, were 36% of global R&D, just a phenomenal proportion of what was happening to move technology forward in the world was centered at the Pentagon. Well, look how that's changed if we go forward almost 60 years. Now it's a much, much smaller percentage, where much more is happening both in the rest of the world. Great for when our allies are investing in new technology, not so great if our adversaries are, and China is catching up fast to the US total level of R&D spending. But a lot of is happening in the commercial world. This is what Ash Carter noticed to say, we really need something like DIU to be able to accelerate how fast we're getting this technology to warfighters. And of course, the technologies are changing. Let's go to the next slide. So the implications of these shifts, a few we've already touched on. Global technology is very rapid, so it means it's less likely than 40 or 50 years ago that we'll hold on to an advantage, which means a third offset, which is what the Pentagon was pursuing a couple of administrations ago, is less likely. Still looking for that. If it happens, great. But The implications of not having something that adversaries don't is we've got to be much more adept at acquisition and new warfighting concepts. And this is some of what's occurring now with the Raider Experimentation Fund and JADC2 that we've read about. We really need to think about new concepts that incorporate different types of technologies, the small, the many, the attritable, as opposed to the large, exquisite platforms that we fielded. The other implication to me is speed is a new competitive dimension, and this is because of the tech race with China. But if we critically look at how we're behaving, I think we'd say that DoD is not moving with speed across its processes. And we have to almost get our mindset into a wartime footing to think about the fact that we're going to have to go fast because that matters. And that's going to be a key competitive differentiator for the US military relative to our adversaries. So we really have to figure out how to reincorporate speed. We've done it in our history. If you look at the rate of new aircraft introductions in the 1950s as an example, if you look at what we did at NASA in the 1960s, which is where the authority that DIU uses to procure things, other transaction authority, actually comes from that Congress delivering that to NASA after Sputnik. So we've done that in our past. We've had speed as a key dimension, but we need to get that back. Let's go to the next slide. These are the 14 technology areas that my boss, Heidi Shue, the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, has named critical for national security. Her predecessor, Mike Griffin, my first boss, had 10 product modernization priorities. 8 of those were commercial. So 2 different administrations here, 80% of what we need is really being led by the commercial sector. They're highlighted in blue here. So this, again, underscores the fact that we have to have a way to bring these technologies in faster. They're being led by both large companies and smaller, innovative companies that would be traditional small businesses. We have to have a way to work with these companies, and they're not going to configure their business model necessarily to work with DoD the way some of our defense primes have. That makes it easier for DoD. So we have to work a little bit harder to make sure that the leaders in these different technologies are able to work with us in as seamless a fashion as possible. Let's go to the next slide here. So that's some of the background for why DIU was created. DIU actually has 3 components now, which allows us in DIU, I think I said DoD, DIU, to be able to work with folks across this national security innovation-based ecosystem, which really is some jargon from the defense strategies. It means we've got to be working with an expanded group of companies and entrepreneurs that go beyond the traditional primes or defense industrial base that we've relied on to be able to field this new technology. And we need to be able to work with those companies at different stages of technology maturity, which is represented there on the horizontal axis. So DIU started with what's in the upper right. I'll call that, for the sake of differentiating it with the other units, core DIU, again, where the idea started. And that is still a key part of what we do today. We're providing early revenue to companies to test their solutions on important problems that the military has. And our goal is still, and we'll talk about this, to get companies up and running with a production contract, not just a prototyping effort, within 12 to 24 months, which still seems like too long, but we all know that that's much faster than the 1 to 2 decades it can take with traditional defense programs. Moving a little bit upstream, we're also trying to have an impact to bring in new vendors to this innovation-based ecosystem, and particularly hardware vendors. What we noticed is there's a little bit less venture capital focused on the hardware that we need. A lot of venture capital has moved to software and later stage. So we're targeting dual-use hardware and trying to catalyze private investment in these firms. Think about batteries, new battery chemistries, or form factors, or space components, or things like that. That's what National Security Innovation Capital is all about. And then a little bit further upstream, working with just ideas and having a mindset towards bringing in new talent, is National Security Innovation Network, or NSIN, that has a relationship with 70 universities, incubators, and accelerators. Maybe the most famous of their programs is Hacking for Defense. So introducing people the very first time to national security problems, trying to solve real DoD problems with some ideas, minimum viable products from the academic community. They also work to commercialize tech out of DoD labs, and there's 33 companies that have been formed out of DoD lab technology that Ensign has played a part in. So those are the three different components of DIU. We rarely think about a company going through each one of these as a pipeline, but more as a way to be able to work with companies and help them support the DoD no matter what stage they're at. Occasionally, we do have companies that go through. I'll list one, Capella Space, which is providing some of the satellite imagery that we're seeing in Ukraine now to keep tabs on a real-time situation. That is a project that was sponsored at a Hacking for Defense course, so Ensign developed that. The folks working on that said, this is something that we need to develop, could have good commercial applications as well as for the military, and today they're a DIU vendor, and they're now on contract with the NRO. So occasionally it happens that we'll feed from one component of DIU to another. Next slide. So just a little bit more detail on Ensign and NSIC. So the network here is introducing a lot of folks through Hacking for Defense and other programs. You can see touching almost 5,000 people here. And you can see at the bottom there, working with companies to make sure that they are successful in providing capability to DoD, with 33 or almost 10% of those companies that come from DoD lab technology. On the right-hand side, we got our first appropriation for NSIC last year at 15 million. It's authorized for 75. We'd love to see it ramp to that. With that 15 million, we supported 9 different companies doing everything from battery chemistry to a quantum sensor technology and space components, even a company that's doing a commercial version of a hypersonic engine. And that got distributed to companies in 8 different states across the country. Next slide. For the rest of the talk today, I'm going to be focused on core DIU. Again, the project-based part of DIU that's bringing in technology to aim that at production contracts within DoD. So we were set up to be fast-moving. That means commercial speeds and working on commercial terms with companies. And we were, of course, the first of the many innovation offices now across DoD, with many of which are service-specific. What we're trying to do is make sure there are solutions that go across DoD. So a good example would be predictive maintenance. That's something that applies to everything that moves at DoD. So a project that started with the Air Force that we then took to the Army and the Marines, and we're now exploring with the Navy. So we work with the other offices like AFWorks or NavalX to take technologies that they're looking at and see where they have applicability across the rest of the Joint Force. And then we're exclusively focused on commercial companies and commercial technology. If I had a chance to rename DIU with Ash Carter and going back to the beginning, I would have named it Defense Commercial Technology Unit, because that really is more descriptive of what we do. So different elements of our mission here from Ash Carter's days, accelerating DoD adoption of commercial technology, that has not changed. Secretary Mattis really said work on the big things, so that's where transforming military capacity and capabilities comes from. We do that by the type of projects we choose and what can go across all of DoD. And then everything we're doing in combination with Ensign and NSIC is about strengthening this national security innovation base, the number of people, ideas, companies that we're able to leverage to support DoD. The things that make us a little bit different, in addition to being the only cross-DoD organization, we've invested in a project lifecycle that we call Commercial Solutions Opening, which is a commercial process. We'll show that to you in a moment. We're made up of the Joint Force, so rather than being service specific, we have active duty from every force, including Marines and Space Force. And then we also have reservists who work with us, National Guard members, veterans, and people with a purely commercial background like myself. So we really have a joint environment to bring the best of what people have done in the commercial world with warfighters who have firsthand experience with the problems that we're working in. Maybe the most important area we've invested in is understanding what the landscape is for these commercial solutions. So we have a dedicated team, we call them commercial engagement executives, who are understanding what's out there in the field of AI. So AI is so broad, you even have to break that into facial recognition, anomaly detection. Who are the companies who have solutions that are successfully deployed? We want those companies applying to DoD problems. So we can't do that unless we understand what that landscape is. We feel that that scouting function is worth our dedicated investment. Next slide. So here's a picture of that life cycle. Many of you will recognize this as a commercial process. I'll highlight a few points. One, we don't start with requirements. That can save us up to a decade right there. We don't need to tell the commercial market in detail what to build. This is different from an aircraft carrier. DIU is not doing those projects. We're buying a piece of software, AI or cyber software, or a component for space, example. So in those situations, we just start with a problem. In fact, requirements sometimes limits competition because we specify in detail how we'd expect the solution to be crafted. In this case, no requirements allows the broad creativity of all the commercial vendors out there to tell us how they'd solve a problem. As a result, we get a very wide set of participants. You can see from 5 to 100. On average, with the 27 projects that we solicited last year to the market, 43 companies responded to each proposal. So it's very competitive. And the way we encourage folks to respond, we had 1,116 companies make 1,116 proposals, I should say, last year. The way we encourage that is make it easy for people to respond. You can respond to one of our solicitations with your standard pitch deck that goes to another commercial customer or to an investor. So we use that to do the first screen. So very easy, because unfortunately most companies who respond are going to get a no. We can't put that many companies on contract. You can see the pyramid that's inverted here shows that. Then we go through a bit of a down select process to get to the 1 to 5 who might be involved in a bake-off to see how their technology works in a military environment. And we're trying to get companies on those prototype contracts in 60 to 90 days. That's the speed part we're trying to achieve to work on commercial terms. And of course, no special terms in terms of IP or anything else, which really look like commercial contracts. Then we go to the prototyping phase. We call it prototyping not because it's early stage technology, could be mature, but we want to be able to test it in a military environment. We don't buy anything based on say-so or slideware. You have to prove that, and vendors only get paid when they meet milestones. So it's a very cost-effective way for the Defense Department to see what commercial vendors have. And then the transition. This is the holy grail for us, the most important metric. How many things do we start that get across the line into warfighters' hands? Key for using the other transaction authority I referenced earlier, no recompete is required. If we finish the prototyping, we can immediately scale production, and you don't have to use a FAR contract. You can use a production OT contract. Very important for companies that come into our process. Next slide. So just some stats on how does FY21 compare to FY20. You can see the 26 solicitations that I mentioned, that's up. In fact, we started 37 projects this past year, only some of which were ready for the 26 solicitations. I already mentioned the number of proposals received, which is up. We're investing heavily in our own contracting capability. This is the key determinant of speed. So while we're hitting the 60 to 90 days on many of the proposals, we're not hitting it consistently. So that's what we're at work on. A number of prototype awards, you can see that's up dramatically from last year. And this is because we've invested in our own contracting capability. And we delivered 8 solutions, which means a capability that got all the way to warfighters' hands last year. And you'll see how that compares to earlier history. That gives us a 41% transition rate, which we're working to get up to 50 or 60. That's up from mid-30s 2 years ago. Next slide. Who uses DIU? So we have a corresponding to our commercial engagement executives, a defense engagement team, which is combing for the most important problems, back to what Secretary Mattis asked us to do. So you can see here in the bar chart, we're being used by across all of DoD. That includes combatant commands, 4th Estate, OSD itself. So it's a pretty broad distribution, even though Air Force remains our most important customer by size here. We're for the groups that have not been participating as much, we're talking to them about how they can increase the participation of DIU. It's free for the military to use DIU. There's no upcharge that we make. All of the money that they give to us goes to vendors. That's the money we require. Congress funds us for our overhead, but we use mission partner funds to work with vendors I think that's a good part about the model because it makes sure there's skin in the game from the military. Next slide. Strengthening the national security innovation base. So the good news is we're starting to develop more of a reputation. More companies are responding. You can see 3,400 have responded over the history, and you can see how that looks in more recent years in 2021. The wheels at the bottom kind of show who makes up the awardees. So a third are first-time vendors. We've now introduced almost 100 companies as first-time vendors to DoD. Most are non-traditional, but for those folks from defense primes listening, we work very closely with defense primes, and you can see about 15% of the awards are going to primes, not because they need a pathway into DoD, but because you guys do such a tremendous job of integrating capabilities from small, innovative companies, since the military does not like some assembly required. So you provide a very important function for DIU and growing the national security innovation base. And then almost 3/4 are small businesses. So most of what we're doing is working with smaller companies to give them a way, an easier way to interact with DoD, because DoD traditionally has not made that very easy, and we can't use up all of your time and energy as a small company trying to figure out DoD. So that's what DIU does, is really qualifies DoD as a customer, make sure that there's money there, a project will result in a production contract. Next slide. Here's what that looks like geographically. Basically, all but 3 states have participated in DIU selection processes, and you can see in the dark blue the states that have won contracts, which now is 31 states and now 9 countries. We don't have an outreach program to allies, but we're happy to support allied proposals, and that's often the case. It's all about getting the best to the warfighter. Next slide. Okay, here's that holy grail for us. You can see on the bottom the number of transitions here cumulatively. That's now up to 42. That includes the first half of 2022. So 8 solutions delivered in 21, 7 in the first half alone in 2022. So an accelerating momentum in terms of the transition rate. And on the top in blue, you see the number of prototype awards that we're making each year. So a transition for us, and we'd like to get this standardized across DoD. I'm working with Nate Diller at AFWorks on this right now, that we'd like to propose to my boss, Heidi Shue. Prototype successfully completed. That's kind of a baseline. If the technology didn't work, you can't go any further. Second, production contract in place. And third, budget in place to field that capability immediately. That's often the most difficult part because the budgeting process is so long. So we have to make sure that the folks we work with are allocating money up front to scale that solution. Okay, let's go to the next slide. One of the things we're increasingly focused on is, what does the follow-on contracts look like? So good if we get a vendor across the line and into a production contract, but how much revenue do they receive? So I'm pleased to say that we're making some progress on this as well. So you can see of those 8 solutions we delivered in FY21, how that compares to the total of our history on the bottom set of squares. $1.75 billion of contract ceiling. That was 4 times what we delivered in FY20 and half of the total of what we delivered over our history. So that the average follow-on contract ceiling is now more than double what it's been over our history. So we need to deliver recurring revenue for these companies to make sure that we create this virtuous circle of the investors wanting to put more in those companies and the investors wanting to fund new companies that will support national security. Again, all in the interest of expanding the national security innovation base. The more companies who are successful supporting us, the more of them there will be to help us with the problem of a shrinking industrial base we have to support DoD. Next slide. So we have some examples of tech that has transitioned that would fall in those 42 capabilities. I'll just mention a couple. On the upper left, you can see a handheld quadcopter, which started as a naval special warfare project to help clear buildings in urban combat, but is now expanded to other applications. You can see the digital wearables here, and in fact, I'm wearing the watch and ring that will allow 160 different parameters about me to go into an algorithm that Philips Healthcare runs to determine whether I'm going to come down with an infectious disease up to 72 hours before I'll feel any symptoms. So this is our rate project and is now transitioning. Will eventually be a DITRA offering. You can see down at the bottom, we pioneered where you see the rocket, space as a launch. So with several companies, 3 of them on an IDIQ contract for $1 billion, so that the government's own rockets don't have to be used. In fact, we just buy space in that rocket, a payload, so launch as a service. On the far right, Anduril's counter UAS capability, basically a smart wall that we're able to use to secure perimeters of bases, and Customs Border Patrol is experimenting that on with that on the southern border. On the lower left, a company that helped us with predictive maintenance, C3AI, generates these hypersonic trajectories. So these are computer-generated trajectories of what hypersonic missiles paths would look like. Very important for defending against hypersonic missiles. We'd have to know what the paths would be. But then we have some examples on the right, which are equally important capabilities that for some reason didn't have those 3 things line up that I mentioned a moment ago, mostly budget. We're making some progress now, but sail drone, a surface sensor, autonomous sensor. You can see commercial satellite imagery. This is making a transition right now, I'm happy to say, but for a while wasn't. So important in what we're seeing with Ukraine, so important for watching what's going on in the Pacific, South China Sea. And then the company Icon in Austin that we worked with, 3D printing with concrete. So imagine without shipping concrete mix, if we want to build something on a Pacific island, this uses local soil, just adjusts the mixture, and we're able to build bridges, barracks, hangars, whatever we want on an island. So very important capability. So we want to move more of the things that are not transition into the transition category. We'll just talk about that next, which we think is kind of the next frontier on accelerating commercial technology into DoD. Next slide. So why do we need a different way of bringing commercial technology to DoD? Well, it's different from defense platforms. First, volume. iPhone here is an example. If DoD is not developing the technology, often it's consumers or others, we have to figure out how to quickly bring that in, where the benefit is we're leveraging all of that external R&D, we didn't have to fund it, and the tremendous volumes, often in the millions. So that's on a completely different cost curve. The second difference is speed. These technologies are refreshed every 12 to 18 months. So we need a way to adapt to that at DoD when we're used to refreshing things in decades. Third, these companies are not developing technologies that are service specific. Often that means for us, we don't know where to buy them. It's easy to know where a ship might be bought. It's not easy to know where these digital wearables should be procured across the Pentagon. And fourth, maybe most importantly, this technology is diffusing globally. So we are not dictating the speed of adoption by adversaries. And if we don't figure out how to use this technology, we're going to be at a disadvantage because our adversaries will be using it faster. So what do we do about that? Let's go to the next slide. Well, we need to rethink the process that started with Secretary McNamara. Here's some pictures of things we were buying in the 1960s. Because I mentioned up front, most of the technology we need to modernize is commercial. We need to rethink the standard process that we use to bring in this technology. Requirements, we don't need to spend a decade detailing how the commercial market needs to build these things. They're already building them. Acquisition, we don't have to rely on the FAR. There's other techniques. And budgeting, we need something that gives us the ability to fund these within the budget cycle, which, as we all know, is 2.5 years if it's on time, late if we have a CR. It's even longer than that if we have a CR. Next slide. So what we think we need to do is basically distinguish between where DoD is a first mover and where it's a fast follower. This is really terminology borrowed from the commercial world. First mover, DoD is still in this position today with defense-only technologies like hypersonics. We are the largest customer, first adopter. So the traditional process, we could talk about improving it, but that's what it was designed for. There are a special case of dual use first mover where I think DoD can play a stronger role in actually shaping the industrial base. That's a topic for a different day. So that's the dual use examples there. But what I'd like to focus on is where we're a fast follower. We need to be a fast follower. Today, we're a late follower. So this is technology already built. We just need a way to assess it and get that to warfighters' hands. Again, don't need requirements. We can use other transaction authority to go faster. We need a little bit of flexibility in how we think about the budget. So here's how we put that to work. Next slide. The recommendations for fast follower would be the following. We need to create organizational homes. We need to figure out where this gets procured. If we do that, we then need to provide a budget to be able to assess and refresh this on an ongoing basis. I call it a capability of record instead of a program of record. The program of record takes specific vendor technology to meet requirements, and you support that vendor for decades. In this case, we would make it clear that we're not supporting a vendor, we're supporting a capability like small drones or commercial satellites, imagery that we can buy as a service. We know we're going to need that for the ongoing subsequent decades, but we don't need to pick the vendor. We just need to appropriate the money for the capability to the office that's going to be the nexus for that expertise. That could be an executive agent that's named at the Pentagon. It doesn't all need to be in the same spot for commercial technology. So you can see the Army being an executive agent for small drones. None is named today, but we have an executive agent for counter drone technology. So provide them a budget, a capability that's ongoing. And with that, the expertise in that office would assess and then use other transaction authority to refresh that technology every 12 to 18 months. And the vendor providing that could change. But now we have a commercial technology that we didn't have to spend time writing requirements for that we can refresh to all of the services. DIU's tried to do this with its Blue UAS program, where we used an Army program of record, short-range reconnaissance, to put 5 vendors on the GSA schedule so that anyone across the government could buy those cyber-hardened drones. And in that way, we could help support a vendor base of US or allied-based small drones so that we could help to offset the fact that China has an overwhelming advantage in small drones, 90% of the global market share. So we need to concentrate our buying power and make a couple of our US or allied companies successful there. So create these organizational homes, put requirements to the side, use the best of what we've learned with acquisition processes, OTAs, CSOs, middle tier, buying as a service, and then a capability that we provide budget for on an ongoing basis. That would allow us to be a fast follower and move so much faster with these commercial technologies. Next slide. So my summary is we can move a lot faster in modernizing 11 of those 14 technologies by tapping the commercial market. You all can show us the way. DIU's already pioneered some of the best practices in acquisition. Those need to be more broadly deployed. We don't have a corner on that. Other groups can use other transaction authorities or CSOs. But we now need to turn to the other obstacles, the long poles in the tent, our requirements, and the budget process to help us here. And if we do that, we're going to strengthen our deterrence and strengthen the national security innovation base by tapping into more of what you all provide, the innovative solutions that can help our warfighter. With that, we've concluded the formal remarks, and we can now turn to some questions. So I'm going to turn it to Arun.
So thanks, Mike, for that great presentation. It was real informative, and I love the non-traditional use of the PowerPoint. They didn't look like traditional DoD slides at all, and I appreciate that. I am the Deputy Director here at the Emerging Technologies Institute today. My role is to try to channel some of the great questions that have been coming in from the attendees and give them to you. So let's just jump into that right away. You talked a lot about the transition success, and it's very impressive. But what would you say are the conditions that optimize the chances for a transition for a project that DIU or anyone is funding? What can the companies do to help you with that transition piece? And then what does DIU do to help the companies with that transition piece?
I think most of it's really on DoD's shoulders. We need to make sure that we've got end users engaged, which really is what's required for an urgent problem. We've got leadership of that unit engaged as well, that we have contracting capacity in place. DIU can now provide that. That's what we're investing in. And then we've got to make sure that the money is allocated up front to scale it. So it's easy for people to get, for us, an average prototype contract is $1 to $3 million. So we can put a couple on contract. it's a much bigger ask to say, if that's successful, how do we start scaling that to be a few tens of millions of dollars? So that's really what we try and line up to make sure that a project is successful. The other thing I'll mention is, while in addition to the money that a DoD mission partner is providing, we're looking for their expertise and commitment. So that's sitting with us as we evaluate vendor proposals and giving feedback from the milestones, the testing, and the prototyping process back to the vendors. The faster we can move that process along, and of course, here's where the vendors can help to incorporate that feedback, the more we're developing a solution that isn't going to be thrown over the wall, but something that the warfighters are going to be pulling from. They want that capability. So we really try and make sure that we have close working relationship with those in the commercial world, we call them end users, our warfighters, so that the solution really meets their needs. That ensures that we've got a good connection there, and they're excited about scaling that solution. Too many things, as Arun, you know from your history, DoD might develop and then it might sit on the shelf. The warfighter said, this is too cumbersome. The user interface isn't right. I'm just going to leave that gear behind. I'm not taking it with me. That we want to avoid.
Okay, another question. Can you talk a little bit more about your solicitation process? Is it periodic solicitations that come out? Are they focused on particular topic areas? Are they big ones that come out like you might see from the SBIR program? And how does a company become aware when there's a solicitation out on the street?
So they're periodic, and the question already indicates that there's a contrast between what others and DoD are using with the SBIR funds, which often are open topics. So what we're trying to do is make sure, again, that we've qualified DoD as a customer. We all know here DoD has many customers, and we've got to make sure that the right ingredients are lined up for a successful transition. We just talked about those. End user problem with leadership support. We've got a contracting capacity to bring companies on board, and we've got budget lined up. So we're trying to do all that to make sure that we have qualified DoD as a customer to make it suitable, basically, to spend time. If you're a commercial vendor, we don't want to waste your time. We're trying to both maximize competition, but minimize the burden on companies, because we're going to need to turn to you again and again to supply something for us. So that, by its nature, implies periodic projects and evaluation. So we're making that available publicly on our website. You can subscribe to an RSS feed. You can write to me, Michael at diu.mil. We'll make sure you get on that so you can see when solicitations are out there. And we're looking for as broad a participation as possible. That includes primes, as I talked about before. So unfortunately, it's a little bit difficult to have those on a schedule that you might see. This is what's coming 6 months from now, but we can, as soon as we've got a project that is curated and ready to go, then we'll let you know so that you can respond to that.
That's great. Okay, now we'll do a set on barriers to successful transition, to even successful entry into the DoD industrial base. The first one is on security clearances, and the fact that often DoD is soliciting for things that are controlled or classified in nature, but you often need to already have been in that family, have security clearances in place to even see the solicitation or to do the work. How are you trying to overcome that problem? Do small businesses need to have it in place, facility clearances, in order to work with you, or how do they get around that issue?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our philosophy is, let's do the work up front and save the security clearances for the back end. So a lot of the work we do is unclassified, so that helps. But for the work that does have a classified application, we'll write the problem statement so that you don't need the clearance to understand it. And many of the things that we do in the military, even though it might have a specific classified use case, the general problem we're trying to solve is one the commercial world is trying to solve. Example would be fusing a lot of sensors together and getting a common operating picture. We just did a project like that for NORAD Northcom, so that they could tap with the full fidelity of the sensors that they have and get a common operating picture. So again, whilst what the use of that would be classified, the problem is not classified. So we start by encouraging as many commercial vendors to apply as possible. In the case of the vendor that was selected, okay, well now they're going through the process to get the security clearance for facilities and people, and we can assist with that. But we don't start with that. That allows more people to participate up front rather than limiting the set to a very narrow group up front. I think there also could be some improvements in terms of how we go about that clearance process. That's also a topic probably for another day and some other folks. So that is too cumbersome, but we get around that by starting with talking about a problem and solution that's unclassified. Over.
Okay, another barrier that's raised is the issue of IP tech data rights, and the concern that unlike the SBIR program, I think some small businesses feel like entering into these OT agreements or traditional FAR contracting arrangements leads them to sometimes lose control of their IP, which I think you would say is important to grow a commercial business, which is what you're trying to do. What's your strategy on letting the small businesses keep their IP and grow their IP, especially for the commercial side?
Yeah, we completely agree with the sentiment, and we are not requiring any special IP rights at DIU. So that's one of the secrets, I think, of expanding this base of companies that want to come in and support DoD. So we work with you as if we're a commercial customer. We don't need access to your IP to be able to field a solution.
And the last one in this bucket is one of the difficulties in engaging DoD, getting to the point of a transition in a program of record, is displacing an incumbent technology, a legacy technology and a legacy contractor. So what do you think are the best strategies for the companies, for you and for big DoD to address this issue of the difficulty in displacing what they're doing already?
Yeah, so two things on that. Not every transition we do is to a program of record. We don't need the program of record, we need the budget, we need money. So you could say, okay, if it's a zero-sum game, at the limit, yes, it's displacing something, but we're leaving it up to the mission partners, a service like Air Force or Space Force, to allocate their funds, some of which goes to program of record, some of which they spend in other areas. So we're relying on them to do that allocation, but in some cases they might decide they need a new capability that's not aligned with a program of record. In our case, we're looking to make sure they have allocated something. It doesn't have to go to a program of record. If we were to use this fast follower strategy that I just talked about, we would be funding more and more capabilities, which doesn't imply a single vendor that stays as part of a program of record for many, many years. I think in general, DoD should be moving in this direction to be less confident that we can forecast the future, more agile, and making our environment more competitive. So it makes more sense. Congress has already asked us, Arun, you're probably involved in some of the legislation, to really think about modular open systems approach. Basically, we shouldn't have a lock-in. Even if it's a large platform, it should be a system of systems where those systems can be recompeted. You gotta have the right architecture for that. But if you do that, you open up to many more vendors being able to participate. A few might not like that, but that will be much better for the taxpayer, for military capability. So that's really kind of the philosophy that we're using at DIU. How can we bring in as many folks as possible to compete for something, a capability, and if that capability could be funded on an ongoing basis, then you'd be able to refresh that technology more frequently.
Another question here, talking about the fact that you have offices now in multiple locations. You talked about the Chicago office, for example. Is there value in the companies going up and knocking on the door of these offices? Is it better to just approach online? Should we get points of contact out for the various regional offices? And then the other set of questions is, I don't happen to live in any of those places. Is it still possible for me to work with you? I think the answer is going to be yes to that question.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. If the pandemic's taught us anything, it's how we can work in a virtual world. So the proposals are submitted electronically to us. even the down select process that we go through where we spend more time with a company, those are all happening virtually these days as well. Sometimes they are in person, which is the way they used to be. So absolutely, you can work with us without being in one of our locations. In fact, those locations really are a place for DIU personnel to be coordinating, one with the organizations like NDIA that might have an office, so we can be encouraging more participation. We're also coordinating with the other military organizations in that area. So our Austin office is coordinating with Army Futures Command, as an example. We're excited in Chicago to be collaborating with some of the National Guards that are in the Midwestern states and have already started forging those relationships. So we can both field capability better to warfighters, coordinate what their needs are if we're in locations like that. But it's not necessary for you to come knock on a DIU door to be able to work with us. We want to encourage people from more and more parts of the country. It's not just a Silicon Valley mission for us. We need to be tapping into innovation that's happening wherever it occurs across the country.
That's great. Okay, there's a set of questions on how DIU fits into a broader defense R&D ecosystem. So can you talk a little bit about how you work? And a lot of the companies, I think, might already have relationships with some of these programs and want to know how to make that connection then to DIU. How do you work with the existing SBIR program? How do you work with the existing manufacturing institutes, which are also all over the country? And then there's a lot of folks working with the service science and technology programs in their laboratories. And so how do you coordinate with those three? How do the companies navigate between you and them?
Yeah, it's a great question. We all know DoD is a big, complex place. So we are not a choke point to enter DoD. We're excited for vendors to be approaching DoD with whatever contacts that you have. And sometimes we provide the service. If you're trying to figure out if you have a qualified customer, we can do some legwork inside and help you with that. So we're looking to, as an example, the service specific innovation offices, Army Applications Lab, AFWorks. If you're working on an SBIR program, but perhaps there's applicability beyond the service you contacted, Air Force or Army in this case, that's where DIU can come into play. So we can make some of those bridges work. We do not award SBIR funds. So if you're looking for that, the place you entered is probably the right place to go. We will help you make some of those bridges, and then we have an understanding of what some of the internal to DoD opportunities are. For example, if you've heard about the Raider Fund, which is a experimentation fund that really is Kath Hicks, the Deputy Secretary, is getting behind. How can we do more experimentation? So we wouldn't expect you to know about that. We plug into that within DoD. So if you already have a relationship, it's great. We can help you build on that. You don't need to have that. That's part of the reason DIU was created. We can help be your entree point into DoD and connect you to some of the other offices that can use your solution. So it can be confusing, but it's meant to have multiple, DoD is meaning to have multiple entry points as opposed to a choke point. If that makes sense.
A couple of questions on how you work with private sector funding sources or non-DoD funding sources. So what kinds of incubators, accelerators, or state and regional economic development organizations have you worked with? What have you discovered about the value of that? And how do you work with the VC community?
So this is a little more complex because there's three components to DIU. Let me try to differentiate. So for core DIU, what we've been talking about for most of the presentation, we're working with the venture community to understand who are the companies in the portfolios that might be future vendors, or we might want to make aware of DoD solicitations. Sometimes companies are in stealth mode and can still help the effort. We are not funding any companies as part of core DIU. So again, revenue contracts for prototyping efforts that solve specific DoD problems. So that's how we're working. If a company is housed within an accelerator or incubator, we welcome their proposal as long as their solution is ready to be tested or prototype. If we move a little bit further upstream, NSIC, so National Security Innovation Capital, is working directly with companies to help provide some funds. So those typically are $500,000 to $3 million. As I mentioned, we've funded 9 companies there. We're hoping to add to that in FY22 that we're in right now. So if you have proposals there, take a look at www.nsic.mil. It'll explain a little bit more about that program. We're working directly with companies, and then our aim is to catalyze private investment. So often we're working with you. It may help to get a government grant that then shows the applicability of what you're doing, the fact that DoD can be a big customer, and then the idea is to help you get financing from the private sector for a next round. Then further upstream, Ensign, and they have their own website, ensign.mil, you can look at. Now they have a more intimate relationship with some of the accelerators and incubators where they're providing a service of helping you understand how to navigate DoD. So they have some specific programs that can help small companies move their capabilities forward. That's where, as we mentioned before, they help 33 companies get formed out of DoD lab technology.
So if you were going to map those 3 different sets to TRLs, would you be comfortable doing that? Is that too simplistic a mapping, or how would you map?
I'm laughing because the amounts that we're funded by Congress don't necessarily correspond. So our funding is usually 6.3 or 6.4. Arun knows what that is. You don't need to know what that is. But I would say if you're familiar with the TRL maturity, DIU is typically working with companies that are much more mature, core DIU in terms of our projects. So that could be 6.7 to 6.9. And then a little bit earlier stage, then if you're looking at what NSIC might fund, that typically would be something that would be 6.3 to 6.5. And Ensign would be a little bit earlier than that. That could be even at the concept stage, 6.1 to 6.4. So those would be rough approximations.
Like, these are great questions. I wish I had
If you didn't know about TRL nomenclature, you don't need to know that to work with DIU.
Yeah, that's fair. These are great questions, Mike. I wish I had these when I was feeding them to other people to ask them to you. There's a set of questions on the tech areas that you might be interested in funding. So first is hardware versus software. Do you fund both?
So on the projects, of course, that come into core DIU, they could be hardware, software, systems. So that depends on what the mission partner is looking for. And it's been everything from Cyber Command is typically interested in a piece of cyber software to a complete system. We're doing an integrated camera and software system for the National Capital Region so we can better identify what's flying over the NCR. So that can be anything. NSIC, so the investment vehicle, is focused on hardware only. So if you have, a great piece of AI software you're developing, we're not going to fund that. And the reason is software is incredibly well funded by the private sector, so we don't need to provide additional help there. What we found is hardware less so. So the real deep tech ideas, often coming from research out of national labs or DoD labs, that can be difficult, and we don't want our adversaries to be funding these ideas. We found that in the original study that brought me to DoD that was happening too frequently. So that's where NSIC is aimed. And Ensign is helping companies, whether they're hardware or software.
In terms of sectors, I know, you pointed out energy, you pointed out AI, you pointed out unmanned systems. Are there any that you're not interested in at this point, or are you willing to look at proposals in all areas?
Well, we're not really working on defense-specific technology. So hypersonics, directed energy, electronic warfare, those are areas where we're not going to be involved, but that leaves 80% of the technologies important for national security that we showed in the slides: AI, autonomy, cyber. Human systems is one of our portfolios. That's anything that makes a human more effective in an adversarial environment. So that can be everything from a dietary supplement to a helmet. That's probably the broadest. We're working on clothing there that incorporates connectivity. So imagine if you're in the field and you have a whole bunch of wires for your various communication devices. We don't want that. So we're incorporating that into a vest that will allow that to be both easier to use and you can be more discreet. So that's a pretty broad category. And then you mentioned energy, which is looking at across the spectrum, both installation energy and operational energy. So how can we retrofit vehicles already in the field to make them hybrid by putting batteries in them? 70% of the time, large Army vehicles are operating, they're idle, providing heat. They're not taking someone somewhere. So those, when you're in that situation, that can be handled by battery power. Everything from that to standardizing batteries so that, again, the soldier doesn't have to carry 5 different batteries. Can we standardize that and make that easier? So quite a variety of things included there. So lots of technologies that we're interested in, but not the defense only ones, defense specific ones.
A couple of questions on international partnerships. Do you have any restrictions on what kinds of companies can participate now? Can foreign companies participate? Do they need to be 51% owned, sort of on a SBIR model or something like that? And how do you work with our foreign partners? You had a map up where you talked about possible engagement. Can you just go into that a little more deeply?
Absolutely. So no restrictions on DIU awards going to foreign companies. Of course, we're going to be looking for our allies. So if a Chinese company were to apply, that's a non-starter, as it should be. But companies is certainly from our allies and partners. One of the companies on the blue UAS schedule is Parrot. It's a French company supplying a small drone. And you saw that group of countries that we had listed, including Canada, the UK, New Zealand, et cetera. So we would like to have more outreach to international partners. Unfortunately, we're limited by our budget to do that, but I've asked for the fact that I've asked for the mandate and the budget to be able to do some international outreach and solutions that are qualified. Those 42 solutions that DIU has transitioned to DoD, that should be available to our allied military. There's no reason why we shouldn't be supporting those vendors with their international sales to allied militaries. I think AUKUS is going to provide a possibility to get more engaged. We're already working with Australia and the UK to see what we can do there. And then increasingly, we're working with our combatant commands to see what we can do there. And I think those exercises in region will allow us to bring in more international partners. The beauty of commercial technology that we work with is it's unclassified. It can be shared immediately with allies and partners without going through what we typically have to work through. Arun knows well of working up the chain to make sure we're sharing things of the right classification with the right folks. This is easy to share, and that's what was a game changer. DIU started working with synthetic aperture radar 5 years ago, a game changer for what we saw in Ukraine. We were able to see what the Russians were doing and really call out to the world that Putin was a liar. He wasn't de-escalating, he was getting ready to invade. Our intelligence community did a fantastic job there, but they were able to share the fantastic job they were doing because we had commercial imagery to show it. So it was, I think, very instrumental in terms of getting the world prepared for and then getting the world to coalesce, or I should say the world, NATO, around how do we address this issue. We can all see it unfolding in front of us.
There's a couple of questions about the transition process, and particularly the contracting piece of that and how it affects the small business's business, right? And cash flow on a moment-by-moment basis, waiting around, that sort of thing. Can you talk through maybe one of the transitions and how you transitioned both the capability but also the contract piece of it to the new customer and how that affects the small businesses?
So critically important. This is why we are taking a very rigorous definition of what a transition is. A transition isn't we successfully experimented with something. There was a demonstration somewhere in the world. That's not a transition. Unless it is really getting to warfighter's hands, we don't call that a success. And that really is made up of those 3 conditions I talked about. So one is that it worked technically, sure. But 2 is a production contract in place. DIU can write production contracts, and we have, but that's not our preferred way because the services aren't coming to DIU to buy things typically. They're coming to the PEOs that they're typically working with. I'll give an example. We got a very good relationship with Army's PEO Soldier. So if we were doing a project for them, the best place for that production contract would be for PEO Soldier. The Army knows to go there when they're buying gear. I'm talking about the combatant commands or any of the units within the Army. So while we can hold a production contract, we don't think that's the best method for the vendor, because it doesn't maximize the exposure and visibility they're going to have as a transition capability. But we do make sure that that production contract is in place, and we've seen all flavors from our prototype OT going to a unit's DoD Mission Partners production OT. Sometimes they'll take that to a FAR contract that can be supported, an IDIQ contract, and as I mentioned, another transition to the GSA schedule. So any of those would count, and the idea behind the transition, the third condition was budget. So back to the cash flow issues. Yeah, the one thing we don't want to see is what I'll call the DoD uniquely created valley of death. You successfully prototyped, we got you right up to that point, and then we tell you to wait for the budget process, which, as I already mentioned, really needs to be rethought. 2 to 3 years to program a dollar and get an approval from Congress is not competitive. It's not going to allow us to keep up with China. It doesn't allow us to evolve to emerging threats, and doesn't allow us to field solutions that occurred within that cycle. The commercial world is moving way too fast for that. So we really have to rethink that. I gave one example here, the capabilities of record, but I'm excited about the work of the PPB&E Commission, which Arun probably helped going in his previous job. We really need that work to be successful. So that's what we're doing at DIU. How do we line up the budget in advance? We never start a project unless there's a transition plan already developed. We can't guarantee it just because we have a plan, but we want to make sure that we've started a project with that transition in mind, and that maximizes the chances that it's going to successfully happen. Meet those 3 conditions, and then you as a vendor start seeing the benefits of that through production orders, task orders that come on that contract as soon as the prototyping is done.
I was kind of waiting until we lost people to get more deeply philosophical with you, but we actually haven't lost people. But let me get a little philosophical with you. So
Okay.
we first met when you were thinking about Chinese investment in the high tech sector, and you were a White House fellow, and it's something that you've worked on as a leader over the last many years, to include, like Jim Boozer said earlier, informing FIRMA. So now looking back, the philosophical question is, how well have we done on this? Are we doing a better job of watching out for undue influence by foreign capital, especially in the national security space? And then the more day job question is, what do you all do to make sure you understand the companies that you're investing in?
I think our awareness is way up from when I started working in this field. I guess that was 2016. So the awareness is way up, and I think at the time Silicon Valley was really not aware of the risks that we were facing, cyber theft, industrial espionage, how active China was. I give CFIUS a lot of credit. I think they are taking the FIRMA reforms to heart and have really made sure that they're scrutinizing appropriately Chinese investments in US companies. A little bit slower on the export control reform. It's a pretty difficult task, so my empathy for my friends at Commerce who are trying to enforce that. But I don't think that we've nearly taken advantage of the authorities that we have. There's probably been a lot more activity by putting companies on the entities list, the sanctioning efforts that have gone on to make sure that US companies are not supporting the PLA in a bigger sense. So I think there's more work to do there, would be my bottom line, even though I think some good efforts underway. At DIU, absolutely. I mentioned we're not going to be working with Chinese companies outright, but of course, as we all know, Chinese have been very active in investing. And our perspective is their investment in technology, while Chinese foreign direct investment in the US is way down from what it was a couple of years ago, a lot of that is due to China not wanting to see more of its currency flow outside the country. So they instituted some capital controls, and they have disciplined some of the CEOs who are on a very expansive acquisition rampage, focusing on hospitality, investments, hotels, real estate, those sorts of things. You might remember the CEO of Anbang Insurance and Dailan Wanda have been detained for their efforts, and the companies have been redirected not to be spending so much. So foreign direct investment in all U.S. assets down dramatically, but the investments in technology have not declined since we did that work a couple of years ago at DIU, which has been borne out by subsequent studies done by the Rhodium Group and Bloomberg, where I saw that Chinese investment in technology as strong as it has been. So that's a concern. So at DIU, we need to be very careful about the companies that we are providing prototype contracts for, and we look at foreign ownership and control. So, checks to see who's in the cap table, who are the investors, and if it's concerning, we'll talk with the company about that. Obviously, if it's too concerning, we won't go forward and make an award to that type of company. And we're also looking at the directors and officers of those companies to see if they are foreign nationals from adversary countries too. So we do our own check before we make awards to see what the risk is of foreign ownership and influence.
Another element of that foreign ownership influence is going to be in the manufacturing side of it. And traditionally, we've done a very good job of investing in R&D and innovation and creating valuable tech data and IP, and a very bad job of making sure we know where it's being manufactured, or keeping that manufacturing in the US or in friendly places. So, as you think about these DIU and other DoD investments in these kinds of emerging areas, what steps are you taking? What steps do you think we should be taking to ensure that we understand the future supply chain, and that we can at least know where it is and make sure it's in friendly places going forward?
Great point. I mean, with the pandemic, it really showed us the importance of understanding supply chain, and globalization is only good to the extent that it helps you with allies. It's not a great thing if you're talking about trading with potential adversaries, and we've seen China use coercive methods to basically punish other countries if they don't like their political policies, if they're making statements that the Chinese don't like, don't make statements about the Uyghurs, or we're going to punish Australian exports or not send tourists to South Korea, etc. So we have to be very aware of the policies of the countries that might be sources of manufacturing of key parts that we need. So at DIU, we're looking at does the supply chain go through China? If it's a for example, in our small drone program, we had to look at what constitutes a Chinese component. If it's a flight controller, something that's critical, we would say that is a critical component. If it's a capacitor resistor, okay, we're going to be less sensitive to that. So you have to do that with a filter in mind in terms of whether that technology is uniquely sourced from that country, or you could get other sources elsewhere. So if it's a unique source that we couldn't get from elsewhere, then we're going to be sensitive to that. If it's a commodity, then we might be less sensitive to that. So we're trying to take a risk framework point of view to that problem, which might be different from the ownership, a Chinese national who's a key executive in a company. That's more of a red line that we'll look at and probably pass on a company if that's the case.
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to highlight for you and for the audience that ETI is actually undertaking a set of supply chain studies, which are slightly different than traditional supply chain studies, because they are in emerging tech areas like hypersonics, like quantum sensing. And it's almost a study where you would project yourself into the future and say these capabilities are now real and DoD is depending on them. What steps do we take today to ensure that supply chain that we're talking about? And it's kind of the kind of things that you're asking that we think about. Hopefully we can think about as we undertake this study. So we'll close with the last question. You talked about budgeting process. You talked about flexibility. You know there's a commission right now. And your predecessor, Rod Shaw, for example, is a member of the commission. Turns out I'm a member of the commission as well. And so if you were a commissioner, what one thing do you think, you would try to put in place? And then I will say, here's the caveat I'll give you. Remember, we're spending public dollars. We need to have transparency and flexibility simultaneously. And so I guess I'd ask this, tapping into your previous experience where you ran companies, but you did have shareholders, right? You did have investors. You needed to be transparent and responsible with their dollars, and in the same way that DoD organizations need to be as well. So what would be that thing that you would try to do if you were on the commission?
So I'm gonna give you a couple, and I am a big believer in transparency. So nothing I'm going to say goes against the principle of transparency, but speed is critical. I already talked about that. So I would do a couple things. Number one, the whole process, we need to figure out how to go faster. 3 years to program a dollar before it's spent is completely unacceptable in the tech race we found ourselves in with China. So we have to think about the speed overall. Second, let's think about flexibility. I would think about these capabilities in the commercial world that we need, and I already mentioned I would fund these capabilities. I could give you 10 or 12 technologies, small drones, digital wearables, where the commercial market's going to refresh that technology every 12 to 18 months. Give the department the authority to continually assess and then field current technology. That's going to mean we're providing that funding for the capability without Congress knowing exactly who we are going to choose. I don't think that's important for Congress to know. I think it's important for Congress to know that we spent the money responsibly and we should report back how it was spent. But I don't think in advance we need to say it's going to be these vendors and exactly this capability within small drones. We need to see what the best of the market has to offer and which vendors are offering that, and allow that to go forward. And then the last would be for the senior leadership, there needs to be some flexibility around the budget. Threats I wasn't aware of 3 years ago. Technology I wasn't aware of 3 years ago that we can help with a fight. So whatever percentage that is, it does not need to be the full 800 billion that we need flexibility for, but 10% would be a very reasonable amount for the Congress to say, you're going to have to report on what you did, and I'm going to fire you if you didn't act responsibly with this. But you need some flexibility to move money around. Arun knows better than most. The reprogramming option is very cumbersome and very long to get done. So I'm sure if we're in wartime that goes faster, but we need a way when we're not in war for the department to be able to spend some of the money more flexibly. Those are the things I would be focused on. And I'm glad you're on the commission.
I'm happy you gave me all those ideas. That's great. And okay, Mike, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you very much for your time in this informative presentation, answering all those questions. Again, I don't know if you want to give out the URL or the email address to the group as we depart here, so they can get in touch with your team.
Sure, it's DIU.mil, and if you want the other components, NSIC.mil and NSIN.mil. Yep.
There it is.
Flash it up again. And I'm at Michael@DIU.mil. It's pretty straightforward. You've got a contact there also.
All right, with that, we'll thank Mike and thank everyone for participating, and have a great day.
Arun, thanks for having me. Great to be with you again.
All right, bye-bye.